Decision modeling is going mainstream as evidenced by the OMG Decision Model and Notation Initiative, which we supported in the past and to which we continue to contribute in the future. Sapiens Decision is offering more than a notation. We provide a holistic solution consisting of a model called the decision model, a methodology, quick step, and a software application called Sapiens Decision. Some people compare the decision model of business logic to the relational model for database management, as they both allow for normalization and follow a rigorous structure. The decision model is governed by structural, declarative, and integrity principles to assure a simple structure, the separation of declarative and sequential information, and of course, the normalization of business logic. The challenge with business rule solutions is that they are technical solutions developed for a technical and not business audience in mind. Sapiens Decision was created to help the business to discover, validate, organize, and manage business logic as a technology-independent asset where the content is controlled and maintained by the business. Our tool allows to test business logic before authoring it with our custom and standard adapters to many execution systems such as Drools, IBM ODM, or even plain Java code. Our objective is to bridge the gap between business and IT with a business-friendly application with powerful governance features and the ability to provide IT with unambiguous and meaningful input. Our top-down approach is goal-oriented and captures inferential relationships that typically exist in tribal knowledge of subject matter experts only. Reaching the persistent data level indicates completeness for the decision modeler. The decision-aware process separating declarative from sequential information significantly reduces complexity and enables better maintenance of business processes by business process management systems. Complex natural language narratives are replaced with easy-to-read graphic and tabular notations adhering to the structural and integrity principles as defined in the decision model. Testing business logic before creating code shortens development time and increases quality dramatically. IT is not longer responsible for correctness of content, but only integration and execution. The built-in Glossary acts like a Rosetta Stone between business and IT, where business-friendly names for fact types are mapped to business concepts and target data models. Communities represent different business work groups with unique terminologies, glossaries, settings, and permissions. Grouping business topics and their assets in common environments ensure that each context will be handled by the relevant team. The sophisticated governance features reach from the request to modeling to deployment and reuse. This is important especially for large corporations requiring transparency and regulatory compliance. Business process and business decision management systems are complementary and very powerful when combined. Decision uses standard and custom adapters to author business rules engines. Sapiens Decision helps to support a common user experience across all channels because the modeled logic can be distributed across both the orchestration and the application layers regardless of the technology in use. Finally, this is a case study of an insurance company where 16 different processes were condensed in one and the business logic is managed and maintained separately in Sapiens Decision. We help to extract the business logic as a technology-independent asset. The overall complexity and documentation was reduced. Maintenance and change management became much easier. Okay. So what I will do is I will provide you an overview into Sapiens Decision. Please keep in mind, this is a design tool. It's not a runtime tool. And rather than going through all the instances, I will try to highlight certain aspects that could be interesting for you, okay? So what we start with is to give you an idea about the log-on screen. So typically, if you look at the client, the typical client has a whole team working collaboratively on capturing business logic. So we have different roles that people have there. The administrator, and I will take the role of administrator today, the business change request lead, the business change document manager, then different business decision analysts, and then we have people that review it, and of course we can also release information from our application. So let's jump into it and have a look at the administration. I want to show you what we can manage here. On one side, I talked about the communities. The communities help us to really capture the business logic into different spaces and reuse them. Here is an area where you can manage what kind of communities you have under control. You have a deployment feature that has deployment descriptors. You can define the descriptors here. We have different message categories that are really important. When we are sending and authoring the code out, you can reuse the messages for various reasons. One is to check errors. The other one is also to give a feedback directly to the end user. Then user management. The system is very flexible. You define what kind of roles you have. The roles are not predefined by us. You can define where they play and what role they play in which community. We have workflows just for internally for the system where we are able to manage the governance. That's an important issue, especially if you look at clients like large banks. They want to make sure that whoever touches the system, there is a record for that, and you can define how simple or how complex this process may be in this workflow here. Now, we work also with the outside world. For instance, with BPM systems, you have seen earlier the diagram of a business flow. A decision doesn't live in a vacuum. A decision lives in a process. And we have possibility to define proxy objects to BPM systems, where we would then call up the application, or they call us, depending on how you deal with that. Then we are able to export. We have, as I mentioned earlier in the PowerPoint, the ability to author code as DRLs, IRLs, Java, SQL, XML, and it's not a live connection typically. The connection is that we are generating the code and somebody is picking it up. Okay? So that's just a little look under the hood, let's say so. Let's have a look at the communities that I have here. So I have Vault community, and under the Vault community I have a sample community, and you can have as many communities as you want, right? There's no limit for you. Now, the community comes with a glossary. The glossary, again, is a kind of a, as I said, Rosetta Stone between business and IT. If you look at one of the fact types are basically the building blocks of our business logic. If I look at one here, make that a little bigger. So that's a sample community where I have the business-friendly name. We work with the business predominantly, so it's important that we are working with the terms that they are using. I understand that there might be corresponding terms on a database design or in the IT world. We have a possibility to map that. There are different areas to also have synonyms, define the target data model, and then also test values. So the key here is to build up a repository of fact types that can be used in many ways. And the more of those building blocks you have, the faster you can build the business logic in your enterprise. Now, on the side, I have this additional info tab, and the additional info tab would give me information where this fact type exists. So I can look and say, okay, this fact type has one version right now. It exists in 2 decision views, in 1 rule family view, and it is a conclusion in 1 and 2 decision views. Now I have also the information who created it, when, who has approved it, so to have a really tight control about what's happening there. Now, if I want to look at the areas where it has been used before, if I pull that up a little bit, I can see, okay, there are two decision views. One is called determined policy renewal method base, and the other one is called determined policy renewal method FL, and FL stands for Florida. So what we are doing is, rather than inheriting a logic, we are reusing logic in so-called views. So just imagine insurance company has a view for one state that might be different to another. And I just wanted to show you how that looks like. Go into it, open it. Get the full view here. So what we see here is the decision view. The decision lives in the process. So we have a decision task. The decision task with reference to it. The way how we identify a decision is by the decision verb. So it can be access, calculate, determine, estimate, and then validate. There could be others. You can add them. But that signifies the decision. And then you have what we call a rule family. So the rule family is a way to capture the business logic. And this is very important if you talk with the business folks, because they are not familiar with coding. They want to have an easy way to capture what is the logic behind, right? So when we go out and do elicit with VPs or business stakeholders, this is the level that they are willing to interact. And it allows them to capture very quickly what are the interdependencies. So the notation works like this. The conclusion is the policy renewal method. And I have different conditions that are leading to that conclusion. You see a solid line and a dotted line. So everything that is under the dotted line means I have information available on a persistent fact type basis. I can catch it, right? It could be a FICO score. In this case, is the policy manual underwriting indicator can be retrieved for someone. So from something. So when we go in the elicitation, we say, well, it has to do with the pricing being within bounds and the policy underwriting risk, right? Now, if you go further, you will define the logic more and more until you hit a level where all your condition fact types are under the dotted line. That means you have a possibility to get them. It's a big difference to a lot of rules engines, because in rules engines you have this information that is at the lowest level, but the inferential relationships often get lost. So once it is lost, it's very hard to figure out how the logic is related to each other. Now we found that in particular, if you are reusing parts of this logic, it's very easy. Also, if you're going from an agile style, you don't have to develop all the parts ahead of time. You can go in an agile approach and do that step by step. Now, if we are going into the tabular structure, we are now articulating the business logic. And the way how we do that is we have on one side condition fact types that lead to one conclusion. In this case, it's a policy renewal method, right? So I read it this way and say, if the policy manual underwriting indicator is off and policy pricing is within bounds and the policy underwriting risk is acceptable, then my policy renewal method is the automatic renewal process. It's very important that we don't have if then otherwise and else's within the conclusion fact type. It's an atomic business logic statement that we are defining here. If we want to have a or, we just add another line, right? Another row, right? So the next one would be, or if policy underwriting indicator is on, and I don't care about the output of the pricing within bounds and the underwriting risk, then the manual renewal it's a manual renewal process. So if we go further, you saw the tree, right? In the tree, you went down until you hit the persistent fact type level. In this case, we do that as well. But with the tables, we move on from level to level until there are no condition fact types that are underlined. Okay. Now, if we look at our initial decision, that was the base. We have also a second one, if you remember, that was Florida. We would like to compare them, right? Because we want to see what is the difference, right? So I can open this. And I can put the compare on. Then I look into my other views. Come on. Right here. So you see what the system does, it compares them one by one. The benefit is that the analyst sees very quickly where the base differs from Florida. So in this case, in Florida, we have a hurricane zoning change and the Florida rider that is different from the base view. It's very important to say that any change that happens is a version. So whatever you do will be versioned and it will be kept. So you can build on it by using what we call a whiteboard. And in a whiteboard, we are able to call in all the components, overwrite them, and test them and see whether it's working or not. Now, if you go and have a look at the compare on the tabular level, do that quickly. So we can take the same approach here. And I just want to see what's different on the table, because obviously not all the details are displayed in the graphic structure, right? So what we see here is we have the rule family table here on one side with and without the Florida rider, and there's a graphic indication that there is a difference. Now, in order to make it easier, we have a compare helper that would tell us what has changed, at which rows and columns are impacted. And if that's not enough, we have also a comparison report that would spell out what exactly has been changed between those two. So that's very helpful if you want to track what kind of changes have been executed at what level and why. Now, I also want to show you the whiteboard. The whiteboard is an area where I would copy my decisions at whatever level. I can copy a whole decision or just a part of it, and then I can do basically whatever I want with it, right? So it's a playground that you can work with the information and find out what you can change and not. Now, in this case, I want to go to the policy renewal again. We have seen at the very beginning, and we copy it into the whiteboard. So, yeah. Don't go in all the details, but you have a possibility in the glossary to define the operator and operands of the fact types, right? There can be values, there can be data, it can be functions. So you can create functions there too. For the quick presentation demo, I just insert the row here. And what I will do is, and just imagine these this information can be rather big sometimes, and I just overwrote that. Okay. So I save this. And now I have a possibility to validate it. So the validation comes up that I have a conflict that the cell has to be populated and has to have an operand. See that? And it will also call out the principles that were inflicted here, right? So the idea is to give the end user, not the end user, but the decision analyst, a possibility to check whether it's in line with the rules that are defined in the model, and whether the decision is sound. We have also possibility then to test it, and before we test it, or before we author it, we would run the tests and make sure that the business logic is complete, but also whether the business logic is approved, right? So we want to have that information as well. So now, how much time do we have?
Here, I would say just 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay. So what I want to show you next is what happens if we are authoring it, right? So let's just get out of here. So the authoring happens on the community level. I can create releases. I have a whole release management tool there that makes sure that release is issued correctly. I have validity end and start dates. In this case, just to make it quick, create a tag. Promote it. Yep. And then I can export it. And then it calls up what kind of environment I want to have. And I just check here XML. And what it does is it evokes a part in the work queue. And here we have the output. And then we can download that and then provide it to IT for further processing. Now I have an example here. Example looks like this, sample release. So basically, let's see here. That is my flood zone, my Florida rider. And of course, you have a lot of ways of adjusting the output to the needs of the IT folks. One of the big advantage here is we are technology independent, so we are not providing the execution environment typically to the client, but the client has, particularly our clients, basically everything you can buy, from Blaze to ODM to Drools to Corticon, whatnot, or they have to create their own code, right? So they are very interested to have the governance and the control over the business logic and then reuse the output in the way that is fit for them. We also alleviate the burden to really figure out whether business has given them the right information, right? In the past, they just threw them requirements documents. Now we are able to give them the code. I understand that they still have to test. I'm not saying that we are eliminating all the tests, but we are able to provide sound logic to the IT. Now, we are growing our partner network, in particular IS and also BPM companies that have an infrastructure and an interest to either capture their proprietary knowledge, if it's a consulting company, and want to reuse it, or companies that offer a BPM solution with custom solutions where they create the code, right? So we would provide the business logic, especially powerful because a lot of those companies, they don't have the subject matter expertise for doing the custom application, but our tool helps them to capture the business logic fairly easily and quick from the subject matter experts. So I fear I'm a little bit over time, and I guess you certainly have some questions. Thanks.